Professor Jo Phoenix has been the subject of harassment and bullying after she expressed views about the silencing of academic debate on transgender issues. She was compared to a racist uncle at a Christmas dinner table. She was labelled a transphobe by her colleagues, and she is now preparing to launch a tribunal against the Open University for failing to protect her. So she joins me now. Professor Phoenix, thank you very much for joining us on Free Speech Nation.
Hello.
Would you like to tell us a bit about your background in case some of the viewers aren't familiar with your story?
Okay, I'm very happy to. I'm an academic of 24 years standing now. And in fact, I got my PhD precisely 24 years ago on Friday. And I do work generally on prostitution, child sexual exploitation. I've done an awful lot on gender injustice and youth justice. And I've been known in my career, which is, I've had a very good career, but I've been known for doing complex analyses, if you like, of policies that we try and bring in to help situations that often have perverse effects, if you like, the unintended consequences of what we do to try and make things better. As you say, 2 years ago, I signed a letter to the Sunday Times and to the Guardian. This letter was organized by Kathleen Stock. Many of us signed it, and virtually every single one of us have been subject to one form of campaign or another. Those letters criticized Stonewall. And we now know what happens when you criticize Stonewall. In my case, I was very concerned about what Stonewall was doing in terms of academic freedom in universities. And we fast forward a little bit in time to April of 2019, I think it was. I gave a talk for a Woman's Place UK. And in that talk, I challenged the idea that trans women can be literal women and suggested that that logic had some real problems in it. And then we go to December 2019, and those two letters that I signed and that WP UK talk became evidence, if you like, of my transphobia and was used at the University of Essex to, as we now know, unlawfully cancel me from a seminar I was due to give and then also blacklist me from the university. That was December 2019. What few people realize is that since
the university case, that actually, I think people will be familiar because that was very well publicised, that the university did eventually admit that they were wrong to rescind your invitation.
Yes, they did. And then they also apologized to the trans and non-binary community for apologizing to myself and Professor Rosa Friedman during Pride Week.
Right. So not necessarily...
Yeah.
No. And so what happened then at the Open University?
And I think the one...
Because this is obviously I remember you writing about how you took a pay cut to take this job at the Open University. This is something that was very much a passion project for you. What has been going on there specifically?
Can we just go back to that passion project? I left school at the age of 15 with no educational qualifications. If it wasn't for places like the Open University, I wouldn't be where I'm sat now. Mm-hmm. So when I had the opportunity to actually get a full-time job at the Open University, I'd been connected to them pretty much since 1996, doing odd bits of work here and there. But when I had the prospect of actually getting a full-time professorship there, I was over the moon about it, over the moon, because it meant so much to me. And certainly that thing to reach out and give people education who haven't had that opportunity meant so much that I was very happy to take what was nearly a 20% pay cut to go there. But the stories that I haven't been telling, the things that happened to me while I was there because of what was going on at Essex, because of my public stance about Stonewall, because, I believe that sex is immutable, and because I do believe that there are tensions between trans rights, which I support, and sex-based rights. There was harassment going on within my university generally, but after the Essex Reindorf review, myself and a few colleagues started the Open University Gender Critical Research Network. Now that was I think it was on the 16th of June. My mind's a little hazy with exact dates. But when we did that, the harassment that I had been experiencing went into hyperdrive, literally hyperdrive. Within 24 hours, 48 hours, Twitter had gone insane. There were a lot of people piling in, and many of them weren't academics. But my own academic colleagues in the university were using Twitter to start a campaign against the network, and using an interview that I gave to a Savage Minds podcast as evidence of the network and me and my transphobia. Now, it's really difficult to underestimate or over. Actually, I'm losing my words, but it's very difficult to say what an effect that had. Within a very short period of time, there was an open letter on Google Docs that had attracted nearly 370 signatures from across the university of people I work with. And that was literally across the whole university. So that, by the time I started reading this, I was just like, oh my God, is there anywhere in this university that doesn't think I'm a transphobe? Now,
that must surely
there's
be
a really
very, very
difficult...
hurtful as someone who, as you've just said, you support trans rights. And then so to be accused of a feeling that you simply don't have, and to have so many strangers and colleagues actually level that accusation against you. How does that feel?
Well, it's out in the public domain. People know I was diagnosed with acute PTSD. I struggle to remember exactly what happened in June and July because I felt under siege from quite literally all sides. I didn't know where was safe. I was asking the university to intervene, to do something, and they chose not to. They chose not to ask the people who started those open letters. There were 3 open letters in the end, 2 of them on university servers. The university chose not to bring those down. Meanwhile, I just kept looking at these signatures thinking, these are people I work with. These are people I've known for, many, many years. And so, yeah, I ended up with acute PTSD. There were a lot of nights that I can't even remember. And it's probably worth saying here, in my own past, and again, this is out in the public domain already, I've been a victim of extreme violence. I was raped as a child. I was 15 years old. And I went through the court case for that. I also witnessed a murder very young in my life. So these sort of that sense of feeling under siege and not being able to do anything about it, that just, well, it's hard to say. It broke me somewhere. And then that the university didn't protect me from this harassment, not just broke me a little bit with PTSD, but it broke my heart.
Can I ask about that? Because this seems to be a recurring pattern, that a lot of academics who face harassment are not being defended by the universities. We saw that with Anne Henderson, who was formerly the rector at Edinburgh University, and similarly with Neil Finn, who was accused of some really outlandish, wild things that were absolutely, had no basis in truth. But the universities again and again won't stand up and discipline the students who are doing this or prevent it from happening. Why is that going on?
Right. Well, I think there's 2 different ways to answer that question, right? The first is that where it comes to students, it's very difficult to discipline a student for harassment against a staff member because, to my knowledge, we don't even have processes about that, right? So we're in a place, a no man's land. I can't speak to that too much because that hasn't been my experience. I've been harassed by colleagues. Which is different because we have laws about that. We have harassment, and particularly harassment on protected characteristics, such as having gender critical views. Now, one might say that the university is trying to defend academic freedom, but academic freedom isn't absolute. Academic freedom is only to the point of unlawful speech, and harassment classifies as unlawful speech. So then you have to ask yourself, well, why are university leaders not standing up and saying, well, actually, that's the line. That right there, that's the line, and you have to stop. I have a theory about this. I think that it is much easier for any university to allow colleagues to slug it out between themselves than it is to actually intervene and come off of a fence. We're also in a kind of new place. As I said, it's a quarter of a century I've been in universities, and this is the first time I've seen this sort of behavior. It's normally academics will be the first group of people to invoke the sort of rules that we have about how to debate and how to discuss. But at the moment, we have a group of academics, some of them are very well known on Twitter, who talk about academic freedom as though it can be instrumentalized or weaponized. And they seem to have forgot what academic freedom is actually all about.
I keep seeing this again and again, is that academics, particularly on social media, who come across like activists more than academics, and certainly quite infantile a lot of the time. Sort of, sometimes I see these tweets and I think, is this a teenager that's taken their parents' account? Or, you know, what is happening in higher education that so many, and I don't think it is the majority, so many are behaving in this way?
Yeah, that is such a good question. And, you know, before I came on air tonight, I tried to make some notes because I thought you might ask that. I've actually got 4 Post-it notes here, right? And I couldn't figure out, where is this coming from? I don't know. I think that this is a generation of people who have been encouraged to think that doing research is about making an impact in the world. And of course, what better way to make an impact than get millions or hundreds or thousands of Twitter followers and to have nice little sound bites of your knowledge get out there and be re-amplified. So I think some of it has to do with the crisis that's happening in universities anyway. Some of that crisis is a result of funding changes over the last, couple of decades. But some of it too, I think, is that people are no longer prepared to do the deep thinking that's required for us to untangle some of these complex messes. It's much easier just to come down on one side or the other than to actually sit there and work out those complexities. Because, and I don't mean to kind of keep banging on, but I keep saying this, universities are not the same as just, a corner in a town. Universities are places where we ask difficult questions. And it doesn't matter about the politics here. We can have a political discussion, but first and foremost, we actually have to produce knowledge. And doing that means critique, it means debate, it means saying unpopular things, it means going against ordinary orthodoxies and questioning them. So I don't know the cause. All I know is the effect, to be honest.
But you talk a lot there about controversial viewpoints, going against the orthodoxy, that kind of thing. But the things that you've been saying, the idea that sex is immutable, this is a view that is held by the majority of people, including, of course, the scientific community. This isn't a particularly controversial point, particularly because you are so keen to emphasise and stress that you support trans rights, and that there is a way to that gender-critical feminism can dovetail with the view that everyone is entitled to rights and dignity.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. So it used to be back in the 60s and 70s and early 80s, of course, universities were the crucible, if you like, for the civil rights movement. They were the crucible for a lot of radical thinking. And every generation has to push against its previous generation. I kind of get that. We have generations of thought. But I think what's happening here, and I hate to say it, I'm going to come back to it, and I know I'm going to get in a lot of trouble for saying it, it's Stonewall's influence. And one of the things that Stonewall did as a lobbying group, and it did it so well, was it captured, and we use that term a lot, it captured the thinking and the processes in universities so that it became seen as being somehow discriminatory against trans people, to actually recognize the difference between, say, trans women and natal women. And I'm just going to give you one tiny example. I was trained originally in sociology, although I'm technically a criminologist now, or I name myself as a criminologist. If we look to trans women's experiences in prison, we have to be able to say, well, what is it that they actually need? Like we would with any prisoner. What do they need when they're in prison? How can we accommodate those needs and keep them safe and secure whilst in the prison? In order to do that, we have to recognize that they exist, right? First and foremost. And then we have to recognize that they are different than natal women in order to chart and understand the different needs of the two different groups. Now, it's talking like that got me into trouble, and it's talking like that gets anyone who opposes Stonewall into trouble, because it is Stonewall who demanded the no debate, and that has had a devastating effect in universities.
I mean, I can see what you're saying about Stonewall, and we are seeing increasingly bodies and government bodies are withdrawing from, for instance, the Stonewall Diversity Champion Scheme and that kind of thing. So there is a bit of a pushback. But in addition to that, you've had the problem with your university yourself and their capitulation to the demands of activists. What next for you? You've raised this money now. What are you hoping the outcome will be?
Right. Okay. So we had the Maya Forstater case, which established that views like mine, that sex is immutable, is protected within the Equality Act 2010. What we need now is some case law, if you like, or at least an example of where academic freedom ends and harassment begins, right? And that's what I'm really hoping from this case, is that we'll get there. The general public have been so incredibly generous. People have given £84,000 as of today in a very short period of time. That gets me to the tribunal, right? And that's amazing. And I'm, shocked and stunned that so many people have supported me. It will probably cost more than that, right? So there's probably going to be yet more appeals. We're looking at maybe 18 months of my life that is given in one way or another to actually pushing this through. So what next? What do I hope to get out of this? Not to be where I am now, quite frankly.
Yeah. Well, Professor Phoenix, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with such candour about this very difficult experience. Thank you.